Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Leaders Forum event. My name is Carlos. I am the content director at Change Lawyers, and I am so happy to have so many of you back. We've been doing this event series for 6 months now, and we've covered so many different topics on leadership, from imposter syndrome to interviewing skills. And today, I'm very excited to be talking about public speaking. I get very anxious at the thought of public speaking, so I will be taking notes along with you all. We are trying to create a sense of community here, so please let us know who you are in the chat box. Drop in your name, your pronouns, and where you are joining us from. And while you are doing that, I want to give a thanks to our sponsor for this event, CalBar Connect, and I'm going to introduce Helen to give us a little message about who CalBar Connect is and what they do. Hi, Helen.
Hi, thanks so much, Carlos. I'm Helen Hong, and I am the administrator for CalBar Connect. And what we do is actually negotiate discounts for California lawyers on the products and services that you need. We are actually a subsidiary of Change Lawyers. So all the revenue that we actually make goes to services and grants that Change Lawyers supports. So we fund legal aid organizations, enhance access to justice initiatives, and fund fellowships for lawyers and law students. So whether or not you're a solo practitioner in legal aid or at a firm, our services could help you, whether or not it's insurance products, student loan refinancing, travel, or business solutions. Check us out. Just hit us up on calbarconnect.com and learn more. If you have questions, feel free to email me at helen@calbarconnect.com. Otherwise, we are so pleased to support and be a part of Change Lawyers. And I hope that you can learn more about how you can access these free services for yourself. Thanks so much, Carlos.
Thanks so much, Helen. So folks, you heard her. The link to CalBar Connect is right in the description box, so feel free to check that out. And if you registered for this event, you will be receiving an email from me later on with the recording as well as information about CalBar Connect. So with that, let's get into the event. And I want to introduce our speaker for today, Fernando Flores. Fernando has been part of the Change Lawyers family for a few years now. Every year he leads sessions with our scholars on BarExam, prep, and sort of on those skills that you really don't learn in law school about what it's like to actually be a practicing lawyer and to move from school into your job. And those are the skills that we really want to emphasize here at Change Lawyers and as part of Leaders Forum. So with that, I want to introduce Fernando. Hi, Fernando. Welcome.
Hi, Carlos. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Of course. Always a pleasure. And I'll let you take it away.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Let's go ahead and get the slide going so that we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm not sure what part of the world you're in, but hope that you are doing well wherever you are. And today I really wanted to share a little bit of some tips related to what I've learned along my own public speaking journey. And really, I want to focus on providing you with 4 words that will empower you to tell your story. It will empower you in your own public speaking journey. And before I do that, I want to make sure that you know a little bit about my own background, that you know who the speaker is, right? And I'm going to take it back to where I grew up, back to where I came from. And I was actually born in Illinois, but when I was very young, I went to grow up to Mexico, and I grew up in Guadalajara. And I ended up being in Mexico till I was 8 years old. And at 8 years old, it was when I reunited with my father. And I grew up in Mexico with my mother and met up with my father here in the United States, in the LA area, actually. And growing up for me in a low-income, Spanish-speaking immigrant family, and this is a picture of my parents and my younger sister and myself, when we were here maybe a year or less. I really did get exposed to a lot of the challenges that low-income immigrant families face on a day-to-day basis. And for me, one of the motivations to really become an attorney was when I was 12. I had been in the U.S. I came when I was about 8 years old, and when I was 12, 4 years later, I was actually in a car accident. I was hit by a car that ended up breaking my femur in half. And it was an incredibly challenging time in my life, incredibly difficult because I wasn't able to walk. I was in the hospital for 30 days, and then I was in physical therapy for another 7 weeks after that. And so that was the first time, as a result of that incident, that I actually got to understand what an attorney can do for you, because we ended up getting representation from an attorney who helped us in that situation. And he helped us make sure that we were taken care of financially, that we were taken care of in a variety of ways, right? So that my parents didn't have to be worrying and be living in fear of these very, very astronomical costs as a result of me being in the emergency room for a long time, me being in the hospital for a long time. And when I saw this, what this attorney did for my family, right? Again, coming from a low-income immigrant background, I told myself at that age of 12, 13 years old, that's what I want to do. And that's what I want to do for others, right? And it really was a key, it was a difficult experience, a difficult life experience, but it was also incredibly just powerful as a young kid, right? To see somebody helping us out. And it really informed what I wanted to do. Now, I've had the great opportunity. This is when I was sworn in by the late Judge Tagazugi. He was the first Asian American judge on the federal bench, and I was the first attorney in my family. So it was really awesome to have him be the one who swore me in. And, I really did take that, responsibility of becoming an attorney very seriously. And now I've been an attorney for over 14 years, with the first 10 years of my career really focusing on trial and appellate work. And that required a very, very heavy amount of presentation skills in a public setting. And what I have learned is that for many people, including myself in my own public speaking journey, public speaking can be very, very challenging. And the main reason is because it requires you to tap into a very high level of courage. And stepping in front of a large group of people who you may or may not know, that can be daunting. And the fear that we experience actually comes from a variety of sources. And I've heard everybody, who I've worked with in setting them up for success in their own public speaking journey, that, it's the fear of messing up, the fear of flopping, the fear of saying the wrong thing, or just being judged as a result of sharing your perspective, your experience, or what you have to say, right? Also, the fear I've seen can also come from the information not resonating with your audience. So in the time that we have here today, I'm going to provide you with 4 words that are going to empower you to either share your story more broadly or just simply assist you in your own public speaking journey. As you step forward in front of an audience, I want you to carry these 4 words, not just in your mind, but in your heart. And if you do this, whether it's virtually or in person, you're going to excel when it's your turn to share something with others. And I actually want to start with that point. With respect to sharing with others, a lot of times people think that when they are going to do public speaking, that it's all about the content, that it's about the substantive content that they are going to share, and that is what matters most. But what I want you to consider is that to be a good orator, a good public speaker, you have to understand that it's not just about the words and the language and the content that is being delivered, but how it's delivered is equally important. If not, in some circumstances, more important. So a big part of the how is authenticity. And here I just wanted to share some of the pictures of the awesome journey and opportunities that I've had to be able to speak publicly all over the US. I've actually had the opportunity to do public speaking in Spanish in Mexico, and I've also had the opportunity to do public speaking in India. And these 4 words that I'm sharing with you are the way that I have led in each of these presentations. So authenticity, that's the first word that I want you to remember. Whether, again, you are sharing and presenting the information that you are providing in person or virtually, you have to make sure that you are staying authentic to yourself, right? The way that you deliver a presentation is going to be very different than how anybody else delivers it. So I want you to ask yourself this question: do you recognize whether you are delivering an authentic version of yourself in line with the content that you are presenting? And the key to establishing an authentic version of yourself for your audience is practicing. There is absolutely no other way that you're going to be able to determine whether what you are saying is true to you unless you actually practice it, right? Unless you actually say those words that you want to share, unless you practice your hand gestures, unless you practice your intonation, the flow, the pace, the speed, where you insert a pause, right? All of that is connected, and it directly informs the authenticity of your presentation. And it allows you ultimately to share the most authentic version of yourself. Right? Let me give you an example. The content that I present at a conference, at a large conference, may be very different than when I present in a smaller group setting, right? And even the structure of the presentation is going to change depending on the context, right? Regardless of that, I always make sure that I practice my delivery so that when I'm in those different environments, I ensure that I'm bringing my most authentic self each and every time. So authenticity, that's our first one. In terms of our second word, I've already mentioned this word briefly, and it's courage. And courage is really, really, really important, because there are going to be times as you approach the date of your presentation, or if you're an attorney who's in the courtroom, the date of your oral argument, or your opening statements to the jury, or whatever it may be that you are presenting on, right? Courage allows you to manage any of the fears that we mentioned earlier, or any other fears that are specific to you. And the most important thing to remember is, how do you foster courage in preparation for your presentation? See, I have noticed a lot of people who do public speaking don't really think about this. Often we think about, okay, I know that I have to engage in this public forum. I was just assigned this particular task that requires me to speak in public, or I just got this, case that requires me to present an oral argument, on this date, and we become focused on that, and we do prepare for it. But what we forget that is really important is to understand how you empower yourself in the days leading up to your presentation, or do you at all? These are two things that subconsciously, if you move forward without any sort of clarity on, right, it's going to be very difficult, right? And that's your purpose and the level of positive affirmations that you tell yourself, right? And if you don't pay attention to these things, what ends up happening a lot of times is we end up disempowering ourselves. That's the default setting of our minds. Our minds will try to protect us from stretching ourselves. They're going to try to stop us from getting outside of our comfort zones, right? And one of the ways that our minds do this is by telling us, hey, are you sure that you're going to be able to do this? Do you really want to step in front of so many people in such a public setting? Shouldn't this be done by somebody else? There's all sorts of different questions that our minds start telling us, right? And stories that start coming up that disempower us from stepping outside of our comfort zone and stepping into that place where fear lives. But at the end of the day, courage, if we use it strategically to reaffirm ourselves that we can do this, that yes, this might be scary, but although I may acknowledge the fear, I am not going to be dictated by it. I'm not going to allow fear to minimize me or make me shrink or make me feel smaller, because the reality is that I can do this. And again, the way that I have learned to foster courage is to really hone in and have clarity on, one, your purpose, and two, the level of positive affirmations that you share with yourself, right? So courage ends up allowing us to reshift the conversation within ourselves from a place of disempowerment to a place of empowerment. In the way that you empower yourself in the months, weeks leading up to that presentation is incredibly important. And I just want to make sure that you remember that, all right? So in terms of our third word, right, confidence. How do we use confidence to our advantage? Okay. So in the comments, I want to take a second, okay? Just write in there on a scale of 1 to 10, if if you were to have a presentation in a few weeks from now, 3-4 weeks from now, what is your level of confidence, 1 to 10, that you will be able to present in a confident manner? Just go ahead and write it in the comments. Like you have about 3 weeks and you're gonna do a presentation, for about an hour. What's your level of confidence that you feel you would be able to build? Awesome. Awesome. Excellent. We have folks that are ranging, right, from 8 to 9 to 8 to 7, right? And sometimes just having more time, right, is something that is incredibly beneficial, right? So let me ask that question in a slightly different way. Say that you had to do a presentation tomorrow, not 3 weeks from now. You were asked, hey, you have to step in and you have to do this presentation tomorrow. Now, what is your answer? Does it change? Does it remain the same? What's the level of confidence on a scale of 1 to 10 that in a shorter time frame, you would be able to build your confidence? So just feel free to share again, just to get a sense. Okay. It goes to 1 to 2, goes to 5. Yep, yep. And so just based on those preliminary answers that we got, and thank you, Savannah, Roland, Angelica, and Emily, I agree. It definitely goes down with less time. And part of that, right, is because we just have less time to review, to prepare, to really sharpen our delivery, right? So with respect to confidence, how do we use confidence to our advantage, right? Even if you end up having a limited time to prepare and you have, just a short period of time to really deliver powerfully, how is it that you can just build confidence, quickly? So I want to make a distinction, because in terms of confidence, I'm actually referring to confidence in 2 different ways. One is you stepping into the right level of confidence in your presentation, right? But also striking confidence in your audience. That is a skill, right? And how do you do that? Well, let's start with the first one, which is you developing and stepping into the right level of confidence in your presentation, okay? Again, it requires practice, right? And the more authentic that you are, and the more courageous that you are leading up to the presentation, having practiced what you're going to say and how you're going to deliver it, that ultimately is going to be something that feeds directly into your own level of confidence. One of the things that I have learned to do when I have a limited amount of time, right, is I end up leaning a lot more, right, on my how I'm going to deliver the information. What do I mean by that? Well, whereas sometimes I may make more detailed notes as to what it is that I'm going to present on if I have more time, right? And that has looked different depending on context. When I've done appellate arguments, when I've gone in and done oral arguments in trial court, or when I've done presentations in large conference settings, right? Depending on the context, in court, there are times where you can bring in your notes and you can have them in front of you, right? At the end of the day, I'm not looking down at the notes consistently, but it is incredibly important to just have those main points that I want to make sure I don't forget to emphasize to the court. In a large conference setting, you can't always have, you can't read off of the notes if you're one of the speakers at an event, right? You have to really be able to practice that a lot more. So context matters, right? The environment that you're going to be presenting in matters. But if I have a limited amount of time, I will make a quick bullet point list of the main points that I want to touch upon, not worry too much about the details, and just really try to tap in what is the delivery that is important for this particular presentation. So that ends up also being really, in practicing that, ends up something that builds your confidence, because you may or may not have all of the information, right, that you need, or you may or may not be able to just, prepare a lot on the substance. But if you are presenting authentically, right, and again, you're stepping into courage, and you focus on how you're going to be delivering it, and you have that down, you're going to step into that space much more confidently than if you do the opposite, where you write everything down and everything's very detailed, but you have not practiced your delivery at all. You have not really thought about what is the how of this particular presentation. That is one area where I've seen people have a difficult time, because then it comes off too mechanical. It comes off, just not as powerful, and it doesn't connect with the audience as much. And I'll be frank with you, it's something that has happened to me. I have done that before, where I haven't struck the right balance in situations where I've had a limited amount of time to prepare. But when I focus more on my how, right, and I make just a quick set of notes as to what I really want to cover, that has come off much more powerfully than the other way around. So I just want to remind you that the way that you build confidence, it actually starts right from the very beginning. So if you have time to prepare, you have to ask yourself a very, very essential question. Why is it important that I share what I am going to share? And actually, the question is important, but the answer to that question is even more important, right? And when you find the answer to that question, why is it important that I share what I am going to share? When you find a powerful response to it, an answer that really lets you know why it's important that you be the one who presents on this date, at this time, at this place, on this topic. When you find and tap into that answer, it's going to strike confidence in you, because it's a reminder that what you have to say has import, that what you have to say needs to be said by you specifically, not by anybody else but you. And if you don't do it in the way that you would deliver it, nobody else is going to. This is going to give you a powerful sense of purpose and responsibility to the presentation itself and to the people who are showing up to hear you speak. So that is a powerful question that I want you to remember as you work on building your confidence in your own public speaking journey. Why is it important that I share what I am going to share? And just to give you an example, right? Do you think that this is the first time that I have said the words that I am sharing with you today? It isn't, right? But it's the first time, right, that I am sharing them with you in the way that I am sharing them with you right now, right? I have practiced the words. I have sat with them in my mind. I have sat with the words in my heart, and I've asked that question. And for me, the answer in relation to that question and this presentation was because if I don't do it, no one else is going to empower my audience in the way that I would on this important topic. And it's important for me to show up because I love empowering others. I love encouraging others to embrace the space outside of their comfort zone and to do it with courage and confidence. And that was my answer. Right? And it's part of why I'm here in front of you today. And what this did for me, it just created within me a very powerful, deep sense of responsibility to you, to myself, and the presentation. And it's something that I used even when preparing for trial, right? And especially in my opening statements. And I just really thought about, like, okay, how does it fit into the theme and why is it important? And a lot of times when you answer that question in the context of your cases, right, what comes to the top is really just the most important things that you want to share with your audience. All right, so That's the third word, confidence. Okay. For our next word, and our final fourth word is visualize. Okay. I've shared with you authenticity, courage, confidence in yourself and in others. And visualizing is a very powerful tool of being successful in any public presentation that you have to do, whether it's at work, whether it's during a small team meeting, whether it's in a large crowd of hundreds or thousands of people, right? For me, one of the things that I do prior to entering into and stepping in front of my audience is I ask a lot of questions, right? I try to understand where my audience is. You know, what are their backgrounds? What are their wants? What are their needs? What's important to them, right? What are some of the pain points in relation to this topic that they want to hear about? And sometimes I may or may not get the answers to all of the questions, but my duty is to ask as many of those questions as possible so that I can strengthen my ability to visualize my audience before I speak to them. Okay? And what this ends up doing is when I show up on the day of a presentation, it's not the first time that I've been there with my audience. It's not the first time that I'm connecting with my audience. I've already built a relationship with them. Right? And this strategy is applicable, in every single situation. And for context, right? Like one of the first times that I argued in the appellate court, right? What I ended up doing was actually, in the weeks leading up, I looked at the court's calendar, and I made time to go in person to see the courtroom, the appellate courtroom on the inside, to see how the justices asked questions of the parties, to understand, right, what it was that they focused on, even if it wasn't the same type of situation or area of law, just kind of what was their style, what was their, what it was it that they were interested in. And that was something that allowed me, right, to be able to visualize much more powerfully me in front of the podium, right? I was able to see the podium. I was able to see the setup for the microphone. I was able to see where I was going to place my own notes. I was able to see myself presenting and sharing my client's arguments effectively. I was able to see myself engaging with each of the justices. Right? I was able to really also, even leading up to it, I was able to see myself getting into the courtroom. And I even made time to think about how was it that I was going to be stepping into the courtroom. I wanted to step in confidently. I wanted to step in powerfully, right? And all of that was just me really building my own confidence so that I can strike confidence in my audience. Right? And my audience was, 3 justices. That was it. It was 3 people. Right? And there were other, attorneys, and there's other people in those situations, as I'm sure, many of you know. But your audience are the 3 justices who are asking you questions in that situation. Now, that's very different than when I've had to present, in front of a lot of people in person, right? And in those situations, what I've done, if it's local, right, and if it's nearby, I've gone to the place where the presentation is going to be. I just kind of get a feel for it. How does it feel to be there? Because I don't necessarily want the first time that I'm there, if possible, right, to be when I present, right? And I don't always do that for a presentation because they're not always local, they're not always nearby, but it's something that I've done. And in the context of virtual presentations, right? Because now we're doing things, it's a combination of things, right? I've been doing presentations in person, I've been doing presentations like these fully virtually, and I've been doing presentations in a hybrid setting where either I go in person and people are viewing it in person and virtually, or I present virtually, right? And I'm being streamed into a place where people are meeting up in person. You know, that an example of that is I had to present like at 6 a.m. because there was an event on a Saturday that started at 9 a.m. in New York, right? And so everybody was in person over there, but the panelists were from all over the U.S., not just the New York area. And so they had people from, Nevada and California and just all different states. And so we appeared virtually for the attendees who were there in person. So that is something that I can tell you from the front lines is going to continue. That is something that is not going to change. And I do get a lot of questions around like, hey, Fernando, how do you adjust your style? How do you prepare? Does it differ? And, and my answer is, these 4 words that I'm sharing with you are the things that I keep consistent regardless of the, the context. Okay. And so, yeah, I mean, and I will share that when it's virtual, I do have to shift my strategy a little bit. There's not as much in-depth visualization that happens, right? Because I'm unable to see you, right? I'm unable to interact fully with you. We have some level of interaction, but it's more limited, right? And so I will say that it's you do have to learn to vary the degree to which you engage in this last one, right? Depending on the context. So I do want to, make sure that I emphasize the importance of these 4 words, authenticity, courage, confidence, and just visualization. And as you continue to grow in your respective public speaking journeys, one of the most important things that I can leave you with is to make sure that you give yourself space and grace to grow and learn. Right? These are words that I have used to help others develop powerful public speaking skills, right? And I know that if you learn to really lean in on them, you're going to become much more empowered going into any public speaking presentation, okay? So I do want to leave the rest of the time for questions and answers because, I can keep talking. I do a lot of public speaking, but I want to make sure that we focus on answering your questions, that we focus on, providing additional just tips and resources. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get into that. And we can take the slide off, Carlos. And I think you're on mute, my friend.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate you sharing those 4 words. I think it's a pretty simple way of, remembering this, especially when you're in the middle of it. Sometimes you get kind of like, or a deer in the headlights, and you're like, oh, it's time, right? So thank you for that structure. I'm wondering, I have a question. So folks, please type in your questions into the comment box, and then Fernando will be answering them. But I'll start off with a question that I was thinking about, which is like, public speaking used to mean a very specific thing, and now in the world of COVID, not necessarily. That definition has sort of shifted a little bit. What are your tips for or what do you see as the difference between public speaking, like in person, and public speaking, like right now, what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because it's a newer concept, right? It's a concept. Virtual public speaking is something that you don't, uh, we just didn't have a lot of practice with prior to the pandemic. Maybe some here and there, but my presentations were 98% in person, right? And so public speaking, as we are doing it now in a virtual world, I'll share that it requires the same level of preparation. It requires the same level of care. It requires the same level of, again, application of these words that I shared with everybody today. What's different, right, and what sometimes is challenging as a speaker is you can't read the room, as we like to say, right? You don't know, right, if you need to make an adjustment to your pace. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Sometimes when you present in person, you're able to see that a little bit more. And it requires a high level of emotional intelligence, right? You have to be able to just kind of, are people looking up and just kind of like putting their hands in their, on their chin, wondering, thinking about what you're saying? Do people look confused? Or are people nodding their heads and you're like, oh yeah, that's a good point, and sometimes you adjust and adapt to those cues from others, right? So in a fully virtual setup, because you actually have different virtual setups, right? In this one, for example, it's a webinar style, right, presentation. And in the webinars that I do, it's challenging in the sense that you can't see your audience, but for some folks that works really well, Carlos, because there's no, it's just a presentation. You're not, worried about like, oh, what's going to be the response, the reaction, and you are sharing your information, right, to folks who are, literally just working remotely or working in the office, living their lives. They're tuning in from all sorts of different contexts. And so it does become really important in those situations to make sure that you prepare, because it's all about engagement. It's all about making sure that you engage your audience with the information that you're providing in a powerful way. And I don't know if folks noticed, right, but I shared a little bit about my story at the beginning, right? And one of the things that I did is I shared it with pictures, because I want folks to be able to tune in. I use no words in my slides with respect to sharing my story, because I've learned in these past couple of years, if I just do a list of things, you lose people, right? So if you want to share your story, you want to engage people, you have to be creative, and you have to tap into a level of creativity that law school doesn't always teach us. And I'm just leveling with everybody on the call. It's things that I've had to learn along the way, like how do I maintain engagement? Another thing, if you're doing a webinar and I go, hi everyone, I hope you are doing well today. I want to share 4 words that are important for public speaking as you do public speaking. It's just going to sound very different, right? And that's where, we all have to start somewhere. And that's where some of us are. That's where I was, when I first started, doing, public speaking years and years and years ago. But the more you do it, the more you tap into, again, that authentic version of yourself. And it becomes easier to bring that authentic version of yourself each and every time. Right? So making sure that regardless of the content, you bring you to the virtual table is really important. And I think that's something that engagement and authenticity can really help someone succeed in a full webinar setting. So
Yeah. And you mentioned, I think this part is very difficult to understand if you're not versed in the topic, and particularly for lawyers. This is not really taught in law school so much, but you mentioned, being able to read the room and emotional intelligence. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what you mean by that?
Yeah, definitely. I just want to check in. Am I coming in okay? I had a little bit of lag.
No, you're good.
Good. Okay, great. Yeah. So, yeah, if anybody could just put in the chat, if you took a class in law school, just put a yes, a Y for yes, or an N for no. If you took a class in law school around emotional intelligence, just go ahead and answer that. Any sort of class around EQ, Y for yes or N for no. Just go ahead and put it in the chat, right? And as you do that, I'll share a little bit about what it is. So, emotional intelligence is really a skill that will make you 10 times better of an advocate for your clients, because it's something that allows you to, and in a public speaking setting, right? It allows you to understand and process and manage, right, the emotions that come up with respect to a situation, right? And then be able to respond, not react, right? And one of the hardest skills that folks can develop, right, is to use the right emotion in the right degree at the right time in the right setting, directed at the right person in the right way, right? Because, and that includes even directing it toward yourself. Because if you go into a presentation and the fear just really overpowers you and the anxiety really overpowers you, it's going to be difficult to, if you don't manage that, to present as powerfully as if, as I mentioned before, you empower yourself. So it's all, we don't always notice it, but there's a lot of emotions that are coming up in relation to presenting in a public setting. There's a lot of emotions that are coming up, when you have a client in front of you who's sharing their story very vulnerably and openly, right? And how do you see that? How do you acknowledge that? It's the same thing in a public setting. When your audience is there in front of you, how do you acknowledge their experience, right? And it's only with practice and doing presentations more and more and more and more that you are going to be able to understand your own emotional experiences and then be able to connect with the experiences, the emotional experiences of the people in the room, right? And I've learned to share that openly and vulnerably as well. In the minute and a half, 11:58 with 30 seconds, right before we went on, Carlos, I felt nervous. I felt nervous. And I have a strategy where I just kind of breathe in quickly. I just, like if I'm like taking a cold shower, right? And it's like really cold, just go, and then I settle. And I do that for like 60 seconds. And what that does, it just ends up allowing my body to acknowledge the emotion of nervousness that comes up. It gives it that acknowledgement, but it doesn't let it take over in the rest of the presentation. So even me with like having a lot of experience and speaking in a lot of different countries, like I still feel it still happens.
Yeah.
It's normal. It's part of
Yep.
our biology, right? And managing that though that's where the real power comes in, and being able to present in an awesome way.
And that's what you don't learn, right? Loss doesn't teach you how to know yourself very often. And I think that in talking to a lot of lawyers, one skill that comes later is sort of like, who am I? What do I stand for? What are my values? And then you can use that to empathize with people and then read a room, for example. I want to highlight a question from Angelica. I have a very difficult time doing presentations and interviews on Zoom with more than 4 people. I get overwhelmed and distracted by the Zoom boxes and then get tongue-tied. And this doesn't happen to Angelica in person. So any tips for that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, that's a great question, Angelica. Like, it's one that we're all, really working through without talking about it. This isn't something that we talk about at work. This isn't something that we're, how do I improve that ability to present to a larger crowd on Zoom, right? When we are on, whether it's Zoom or any other virtual format, right? One of the things that happens is we get boxed in, and it's not normal. It's not the normal setting for us to have to look at each other's faces nonstop. Okay. Generally, when you pass someone on the street, then you're looking at me, Carlos, and I go,
yep.
Okay, you smiled right away within milliseconds.
Yeah.
You shared a smile right back, right? And even virtually, right, that happens. So we're reading each other, right, constantly, each other's faces. But what Zoom does, it just blows that up even more. It enhances that tremendously. And we're just forced to constantly look at and read, and sometimes we don't know if the expression on a particular person's face is related to the information that you are sharing, or I'll be, forthright about this. Sometimes I have a presentation going, and maybe of you do as well. You're working on something on the side, or there's a email that's coming in, or that you have to respond to, or a document that you're writing or preparing, right? Like, we do that, right? And again, it goes to attention, it goes to engagement, right? And so that person's expressions, Angelica, that you are seeing may or may not be related to what you are presenting. So one tip is to consider, right, detaching yourself from the expressions that you are seeing in others in those types of settings. And if you don't necessarily be fully guided by that, right, and instead consider asking questions, consider engaging your audience. It's like, hey, what do you think about that? I've done that throughout this presentation, and I've tried to model that. It's like, hey, if you had 3 weeks to present, how high do you think you can bring your confidence up? Okay, if you had to present tomorrow, how does that differ? I want to get a sense of where you're at, right? And even if I were to see everyone's faces, I necessarily wouldn't be able to get that level, that answer, right? Unless everybody was going like, yeah, I can build my confidence, or no, I can't build my confidence, right? Unless there was some other cue. But what I suggest, be more intentional about what other tools you use to connect with your audience and to engage your audience, whether it's a poll. Zoom has tools where you can do a poll. And a lot of times when you start with a question, when you start with a poll, it actually kind of soothes you a little bit, and it makes the beginning a little bit easier, right? And my recommendation, also is, as you continue doing presentations on Zoom, right, You can do this with friends. You can do this with family, right? You can do this with colleagues. Like, hey, I want to do a practice session. And instead of 4 people, right, bring in 5 people. Sometimes we try to get too much outside of our comfort zone. And the way that you're going to grow is not by going from 4 to 100 very quickly. I would, I would find that very challenging. So work on building up slowly. You're right now, okay. 4 is your number. It can be maybe a little bit challenging still, but try to get slightly outside your comfort zone to 5 or 6 people. Over time, work up to like 7, 8, then to 10. And this is over a period of weeks. It could be months, right? But the more you practice in front of that number audience, right now yours being 4, the more comfortable you're going to get with that, and then the more comfortable you're going to be stepping outside of your comfort zone to a slightly larger number, right? Yeah. So that would be some of my thoughts and tips around that.
Yeah, I relate to that really hard, because I remember when all of this started, and even now, just something about all those little boxes on screen really stressed me out in a way that I was like, it shouldn't, right? Like, why? If anything, it should make it easier, but it didn't do that. And so you're right. I think that, when you're in person, you're able to, I use my hands a lot. I think a lot of POCs, we use our hands a lot. We're very expressive. You can like look out the window. You can, you have options, but when you're on the Zoom screen, it's like tunnel vision, right? And one thing that I've been doing a lot is that I'll actually move away from the Zoom screen. Like, I'll still keep talking as if it's in front of me, but I'll actually be looking at something else. And that, I don't know, that takes it away from me for a little bit, like I don't have to be like in the Zoom meeting. And then all of a sudden I just start talking like myself, and it feels, I don't know if it makes a difference for the people that I'm talking to, but it makes a difference for me. I feel a lot more calm. I notice my heart rate goes down, and I'm kind of like almost talking to a friend,
The other thing too, Carlos, on that question, and yeah, I'm glad that helped, Angelica, work with the settings. Mm-hmm. If you just want to put yourself on there and, and not see anybody else, you can just go speaker mode or pin yourself, and that's it. Or maybe just have one other person. So even if it's like 100 people, you're only looking at 2. Mm-hmm. And that could be like another way of kind of fast tracking your success in that environment.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time, but Fernando, I just want to thank you for being part of Leaders Forum with us, and just sharing your experiences with us. I was going to say sharing your wisdom, but honestly, it feels like wisdom is too far removed from what you do. I feel like what you do is very personal and very like approachable. It feels like you know so much, but you make it so easy for us to digest. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we really wanted to bring you on here. So thank you so much, Fernando. Please tell folks where they can find more about you.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. If you want to connect right now, you can reach me in one of 2 places. You can just go ahead and send an email to, if you have any bar exam related questions or anybody needs support, barexamgameplan@gmail.com. And I'm also the founder of Health and Wellness University, where I focus on a lot of health and well-being resources and coaching. And it's a longer email, healthandwellnessuniversity@gmail.com as well. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Fernando. We'll see you later.
All right, take care.
All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Leaders Forum. If you all are interested in the Supreme Court and everything that's been happening there, from the leaked draft opinion of Roe to the actual eventual overturning of Roe, we're going to be hosting a fireside chat tomorrow with Professor Melissa Murray. It'll be right here on our YouTube channel at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time. You can find the link for that event in the description box. And Melissa Murray is actually a professor, but also a host of one of the most popular legal podcasts, Strict Scrutiny, where she comments on the legal culture surrounding the Supreme Court. So check us out for that tomorrow. And in the meantime, have a great day.